phone calls, the whole panoply, the whole 9 yards, as the Americans say. So get ready for that. Put it in your diary, and above all, donate so that we have a fighting fund and don't have to close the midweek moats down again and replace it by just me in front of a camera, wielded by only my good wife. So you can do that on the super chat mechanism here on YouTube. Just go to super chat and you can donate any amount, any denomination. And I'm asking only for $1, £1 from each and every one of you. Or you can go to moats.tv, our website, and go to the donate function on there. Please, I need you to make sure that the 12th of October goes off like, I don't know, a Sputnik or something, and not like a rocket that goes up with a bang and burns stick comes down after just a short period of time. So lean in for the nuggets. Here is the most important nugget for me this week. The Galloway Show, no budget television, has now been viewed. Last week's show alone has now been viewed by 511,900 people, more than 500,000 people. As a good man, the Highlander, was just saying to me on Twitter not 2 minutes ago, I must be doing something right. Well, that is true. I'm quite good, I think, at what I do. I have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and by the grace of God, I can impart it smoothly and eloquently. But as I pointed out to Highlander, I'm standing out because of the flatness of the surrounding landscape. If you had been watching only mainstream media throughout the course of the Taiwan crisis and throughout the course of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, throughout the course of many other crises in the world, then you might as well have been on the moon for all the truth and honest reporting that you have been able to imbibe. Close to zero. The mainstream media and even big tech in the alternative media has gone toto. It has gone gung-ho for the war effort. It has militarized itself on behalf of the NATO military establishment. It cares not for the truth. It cares not for objectivity. It lies routinely, absolutely routinely, about the most basic questions in international affairs. This show tonight is going to be all about international affairs. All you have to know about British politics is that Thick Lizzy is your new Prime Minister. Thick Lizzy and Joe Biden are going to be guiding the Anglo-American alliance in foreign affairs over the next few years. Frightening, I know, but we'll have to live with the consequences. And those that are responsible for Boris Johnson ever coming to power in the first place are equally co-responsible for Thick Lizzy in 10 Downing Street. And I, for one, will continue to hold them to account. But there's so much happening on the international scene that I've extended tonight's show from 1 hour to 1.5 to 90 minutes. We'll be going strong. As long as you are interested and the questions and comments keep coming in, and I can see them on my screen now. Where else to start but with the Taiwan-China-American crisis manufactured by the Biden administration through the octogenarian witch, Nancy Pelosi, the biggest punishment that China could possibly have delivered back to the people of the United States for the egregious insult to China's national integrity, sovereignty, and self-esteem would be to have sent Nancy Pelosi back again, to make the American people suffer still more under the gerontocracy of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, a woman who entered the House of Representatives well over 30 years ago as a relatively impecunious junior representative and will leave it, if she ever leaves it, worth more than $100 million. A decades of insider trading and profiting on the foreign policy decisions and domestic policy decisions that she has helped in later years as the third most senior politician in America to pilot through. Her husband, recently arrested for extremely drunk driving. Well, if you were married to Boozy Pelosi, you wouldn't be able to stay off the drink either, is an inside trader. He's a man who profits mightily from the pillow talk of his wife, and every trade that he makes seems to do incredibly well. And you can work out why. The Biden administration sent Boozy Pelosi to Taiwan. Make no mistake about that. When they didn't know how it was going to end, the White House sought to distance themselves from this egregious breach of China's territorial integrity and its national sovereignty by claiming, absurdly, that the visit had nothing to do with her. Even though she was escorted by the United States Air Force, even though she was fully briefed by Foggy Bottom, that's not her, Foggy Bottom, that's the foreign policy heart of the United States, the US State Department, though she's probably got a foggy bottom much of the time. Her aircraft was accompanied by a tanker jet pumping Smirnoff vodka directly into the plane. She's better before lunch, even better before breakfast. I don't know what the Taiwanese made of her, but I do know that her visit has changed everything in many important regards. I very much know, that there are many people who were disappointed that China did not physically stop Nancy Pelosi's arrival at Taipei Airport a couple of days ago. It would have been very tempting, I have no doubt, for China to, if necessary, shoot down the airplane of the third most powerful politician in the United States. They would have been perfectly within their legal rights to do so for reasons I shall now explain. But they did not do that. Maybe the United States wanted them to do that. Maybe Joe Biden was hoping that he wouldn't have to look at Boozy Pelosi's wizened face ever again, maybe. But China did not go down that path. But you should know that the Chinese people are very patient people, and that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and that the cat will undoubtedly be skinned, and that revenge is a dish best served cold, and China will now serve it very cold indeed. China will take a variety of economic, military, and strategic decisions and actions which will make America pay highly for this most serious breach of the one China policy which the United States continues to claim that it believes in. I learned to my cost from social media that there are a lot of people extremely ignorant about Taiwan. I see in the Daily Mail this hour an article whose headline reads, "Why are China and Taiwan enemies?" An explorer. China and Taiwan are not enemies. China and Taiwan are the same country. Taiwan is China. China is Taiwan. They are part of the same country. Don't believe me. Believe the United States government itself. Believe the British government, the French government, the German government. Virtually every single government in the world fully accepts that there's only one China, and that ipso facto, Taiwan is a part of China. The people in Taiwan regard themselves as part of China. Therefore, Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was the exact equivalent of the third most powerful politician in China making a state visit to Hawaii to meet with Hawaiian separatists, to give them high-powered weapons and the promise of unlimited military and strategic support in their attempt to break free from the United States of America. It's the equivalent of the Chinese arriving in Pearl Harbor. How about that one? How about that one? Not the Japanese, another yellow peril this time. It's the equivalent of China arriving bearing nuclear weapons and the promise of nuclear warheads to go with them to Pearl Harbor, to Hawaii. Hawaii is a state of the United States of America. It's indissolubly a part of the United States of America. If there was any danger of the secession of Hawaii from the Union, anyone encouraging it would be locked up, if not assassinated. Maybe we'll have cause to discover that over the next few years. So imagine China putting itself into that situation with the third highest ranking Chinese official arriving unwanted, uninvited, and against the express warnings of the United States government. That would lead to war, wouldn't it? But then the United States is led by people far more reckless and far more hungry for war than China. China has not been at war with anyone for 50 years or more. China has never invaded anyone. Communist China has never invaded anyone. It entered Korea, that's true, 70 years ago, and sacrificed 1 million men because it knew that the United States invasion of Korea was merely a prelude to a United States invasion of the United States of America. And it entered Korea at the express invitation of the government of North Korea. So the decision that the Biden administration made, and it was their decision, was not Nancy Pelosi, who can't bite her nails, never mind make a decision of that magnitude on her own, was fraught with terrifying risks. The United States Air Force, taking off from Japan, presumably knew that. That's why they sent a flight of fighter jets to accompany her American official airplane. The Chinese knew it. That's why they lifted their Air Force from Fujian in southeastern China into the air, flying into Taiwanese airspace. The civil defenses of Southeast China were on complete alert. Air raid sirens were blaring throughout the night. A state of near war now exists between China and its renegade breakaway province of Taiwan now exists, but a state of near war now exists between the People's Republic of China, 1.5 billion people strong, the biggest manufacturing economy in the whole world, soon to be the richest economy in the whole world, the holder of more US dollars and treasury bonds than the US Treasury itself, an enormously important foe. So the United States, already engaged in a war in Ukraine, to which I shall turn, decided to launch a second war at the same time, apparently oblivious of all history, of Adolf Hitler, of Napoleon. They want to fight Russia and China at the same time. Now, many of you don't know that Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger and Brzezinski in the Carter administration, much later, would never, ever have made a mistake like that. As a matter of fact, they gave their whole foreign policy careers into keeping Russia and China as far apart from each other as they possibly could, because they knew that China and Russia together as one power would be unstoppable, irresistible, economically and militarily on the globe, on the earth, in the world. They knew that. And they very successfully divided. the Soviet Union and China for many decades. But that's all over now, baby blue. Because one of the consequences of Nancy Pelosi's actions this week will be that China will never again return to the status quo ante with the United States of America. There'll be no glad, confident morning again. The Chinese have already put on hold a major multi-billion-dollar investment in an iron ore development in the northeast of the United States that they were planning, indeed, almost at the stage of breaking ground. They've put that on hold. China will now start to dump US bonds at a loss to themselves, but trashing the value of those bonds in the bond market of the United States. If they've any sense, and I believe they do, they'll start to divest themselves of American dollars, again, crashing its value in the world. They will take economic countermeasures, but they may also take some military ones. And here's an educated guess that I'm prepared to make to you. And I commend it to the Chinese leadership if they're watching this broadcast. China should send full military infrastructure, support, troops, and weapons to Cuba. It should replicate in Cuba exactly what the United States has done in Taiwan. It should say, if Cuba is going to suffer the depredations of 60 years of economic warfare from the United States, we'll take Cuba under our wing. We'll make Cuba a hub of the Belt and Road Initiative. We'll pave Cuba with highways, with railways, with airports, with high-tech investment, with Wi-Fi, with everything that the Cuban people could possibly need, including military protection from the United States of America, which has already, of course, invaded and launched subversive terrorist attacks against Cuba over many decades. I'll go one further. China should do the same thing in Venezuela. China should do the same thing in Nicaragua to protect both countries from the destabilization and subversion mounted from Washington. It should lift those two countries, as well as protecting them with the necessary military force. It should not support separatism in Hawaii. It should not support separatism in Texas. It should not support separatism in California. That would be to lower themselves to exactly the same level of the United States itself. But they should defend their allies, sovereign states, from the ongoing aggression and aggressive threats of the United States. And I predict they may well do something like I have just suggested. China will take revenge. The Chinese leadership is wise, sagacious, and patient. But revenge it will certainly take. War is breaking out all over the world, so much so that I can't get it all in, even to the 90 minutes. Let me talk about the one that started earlier in the week on the very day or the eve of Pelosi's landing in Taiwan. I refer to the killing of Serbian border guards by Kosovan irregulars, backed up by NATO forces, KFOR, who illegally occupy a part of Serbia, which they have illegally recognized as a separate state called Kosovo. Kosovo is not a state. Kosovo is a NATO protectorate, which has falsely been declared a state by allies of the United States of America, and has been admitted to international Olympics, international sporting contests, FIFA, the World Cup, even the Euros, even though the Palestinian people can't get a look in on any of these levels. A complete non-state called Kosovo has been recognized and is occupied by the armed forces of NATO. Incidentally, the Ukraine just withdrew their forces from the NATO occupation of Kosovo. The Kosovans did not attack the Serbians on their own, just like Nancy Pelosi didn't take her martini on board that aircraft and head for Taiwan on her own. The Kosovans were told to attack Serbia. The Kosovans were told to pass laws just like the laws in Ukraine after the coup in Kiev in 2014, which discriminate mightily against the Serbian citizens of Kosovo. And there are many hundreds of thousands of those. Short of ethnically cleansing them, there's nothing that NATO can do about that. So instead, the Kosovan authorities passed laws which effectively outlawed the Serbian language and Serbian culture from the territory they hold, courtesy of NATO, of Tony Blair and Bill Clinton and the ongoing occupation. This was a deliberate provocation, exactly like the provocation mounted by Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan. It was a probe at Russia's near abroad, just like the violent coup that was launched over Christmas in Kazakhstan was a probe at Russia's near abroad. Just like the conflict which has now broken out and is blazing fiercely between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Let me turn to that. The legal position of the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh is on Azerbaijan's side. Make no doubt about that. This is Azeri territory. But the people are another matter. The people are Armenian. In the Armenian enclaves, millions of them living there for centuries in Nagorno-Karabakh. That's what the Armenians call it. Nagorno-Karabakh is not a part of Armenia. So Russia does not have any legal obligation to come to its defense. But it does have a legal treaty obligation to come to the defense of Armenia, because Armenia, like Kazakhstan, is a member of the military pact of former Soviet countries that they will come to each other's aid if any of them are attacked. A pact that was last triggered when the West attempted to regime change the presidency in Belarus. Now, at the moment, the fighting, it's actually a slaughter already, and the slaughter that happened last year there should not be underestimated just because you didn't see it on Western TV. The Azeris, Shiite Muslims, fortified by fanatics of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda variety, were daily decapitating dozens of people, Armenian people, when they invaded the Nagorno-Karabakh enclaves last year. Backed to the nth degree by Turkey, they have all of the latest paraphernalia for war. And they are, this hour, remorselessly pounding in a well-planned and coordinated attack on the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. They did not do so of their own volition, any more than the Kosovans fired on the Serbians of their own volition, any more than Nancy Pelosi flew to Taiwan of her own volition. All of these are US-inspired provocations to cause increased difficulties for Russia, to weaken the Russian war effort in Ukraine, to give Russia other places in its own backyard to worry about. They may or may not succeed in doing that. But if a hair on an Armenian head is touched in Armenia, the Russians will respond. And they will then enter a state of war with Azerbaijan, which is effectively now an occupied country, occupied by Turkey, a member of NATO. You see where I'm going here? You see the dangers here of a new Russia-NATO front in the Azeri-Armenian conflict. Now, Russia can try to mediate in this conflict, but as it has been called by the Azeri side, Operation Retribution, and as its declared aims are to liberate the entire Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, there's not that much on the face of it to mediate. And war may well be about to break out between Lebanon and Hezbollah across the Lebanese-Israeli border. The Israelis are making ready for another attack on Lebanon, perhaps on the scale that the one they made in 2006, which leveled parts of Beirut, but which led to the defeat of the Israeli forces on that occasion, as they had earlier been driven out of almost all of Lebanon by Hezbollah in 2000. Hezbollah are ready for this fight, indeed have been preparing for it. It's an honor for them to fight the Israeli enemy. It's an honor to die fighting the Israeli enemy. As a matter of fact, it's a ticket to paradise. It's a martyrdom. So Israel should not imagine that Hezbollah is in any way afraid of another Israeli invasion. But if that happens, Israel will not have invaded Lebanon of their own volition. They will not have invaded Syria of their own volition, because a war in Lebanon ineluctably draws in a conflict with Syria. They will be doing so at the behest of the United States, on the orders of the United States of America. As you'll already have gathered from the foregoing, the United States, like a giant bull in a china shop, is causing wreckage and carnage across the globe. That's not a surprise. It's not a paper tiger, the American empire. It's an old tiger. Many of its teeth have fallen out. It's lame. It's dying, but it's still a tiger. It still has the ability to destroy, if not to build. It can build nothing, can afford to build nothing. Even in its own country, it can't build anything. Never mind building roads in Africa, they can't build roads in the United States. Never mind bridges in Asia, like the Belt and Road Initiative, they can't even repair the thousands of bridges that are in a dangerous state of disrepair in the United States. Never mind keeping the peace, they can't keep their own school children safe from mass shooters on a daily basis, massacring their own people. The United States can do nothing for you, but it can kill you. And it's ready to kill you. And it's now killing across the globe in all the theaters I have just skated across. It's a very serious situation. But don't despair. Short of a thermonuclear confrontation, which will be the end of all of us, only the cockroaches will survive it. Short of that, and you have to imagine that the generals would stop Joe Biden if, stumbling for the lavatory in his soiled pajamas one night, he tripped over the nuclear football and caused thermonuclear war to break out across the world. You've got to imagine the generals, at least, would stop him. But short of thermonuclear global World War III, the Americans are losing everywhere. Serbia will win any confrontation with Kosovo and NATO. The Serbian people are entirely united behind their territorial integrity. After all, they saw their country, Yugoslavia, broken down and broken apart by imperialist conspiracy that lasted decades. Some of you are too young to remember it. Bush House in London used to be the headquarters of the BBC World Service, had 7 different radio stations broadcasting 24/7 in every single national language of the former Yugoslavia. Why? Because they love Croats, because they love the sound of Slovenian, because Montenegrin was magnificent to them, because Britain had a deep interest in the well-being of the peoples of Yugoslavia. Don't be ridiculous. The BBC World Service spent all that money and all that time on all those languages so that they could resurrect the serpents of separatism and nationalism in Yugoslavia in order to break the country. Why? Because Tito, the great Yugoslavian leader, decades ahead of his time, he was Deng Xiaoping before Deng Xiaoping existed in political terms, was renovating socialism in the colors of Yugoslavia and had made it into a country that people loved, went on holiday in, supported the great football powers, Red Star Belgrade, Partizan Belgrade, the great Yugoslav national football team. They wanted to destroy Yugoslavia, and they succeeded in destroying it. But the Serbians have nowhere else to go. Their backs are against the wall. There's nowhere to retreat to now. They are where they intend to stay. There they stand. They can do no other, and they will do no other. And so they will fight to the very last Serbian. I know them well. Think Nemanja Vidic, the legendary Manchester United centre-back. Think of him. Remember him. That's what the Serbians are like. Think of millions of Vidics. I'll not sing the song that we used to sing at Old Trafford because it contains a swear word and my children are here. But some of you may remember it. So the Americans will not succeed in destroying Serbia. The Russians will not allow NATO and Turkey to destroy Armenia. And the Ukrainians have already lost the war. If you had any access to any media other than the mainstream media, you'd already know that. Maybe some of you are hearing me say this for the first time. I don't know. I commend you to ASB Military. ASB Military News on Telegram, which gives you literally minute by minute deep dive into what's happening on the ground in the war in the Ukraine. You can hear the Ukrainian soldiers and commanders describe the catastrophe, what Zelensky called the hell of eastern Ukraine right at this minute. But whilst the Ukraine subject could have been closed peacefully by the implementation of the Minsk II agreements, guaranteed by Germany and France, but never implemented by Zelensky, even though he was elected on a promise to implement them, the war can no longer be solved by regional autonomy in Donetsk and Lugansk. In fact, the war can no longer be solved even by the partition of Ukraine into two states, east and west. In the eastern state, populated by Russian-speaking people, where all of the industry is, where most of the agriculture is, even that will no longer end this war. Because this war has spread, as all wars do, not just into an east-west Ukraine war, but a north-south Ukraine war. The south of Ukraine is also being liberated, and with it, the entire coastline, including Odessa, which will no longer be a part of the Kiev rump state, which will become, like Kosovo, a NATO protectorate, paid for by you, the taxpayers in the European Union. You might have to take them into the EU, in which case there will be the biggest net beneficiaries of EU spending that you have ever dreamt of. Think Albania to the power of 10. The Western Ukraine, Kiev rump state will be a burden on your back forever. Unless there is regime change in Kiev. And that's what the Russians are increasingly talking about. If the people of Western Ukraine can rid themselves of the fascist-supported Kiev coup authorities and return to a genuinely neutral, patriotic government, then maybe a better settlement can be found. But short of that, all of the East and all of the South will be liberated. And Pelosi and Joe Biden and Boris Johnson and Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron can go whistle. They can dance up and down. They can rend their garments. They can gnash their teeth and they can wail. But they can do nothing about it. That's me. I've spoken for 36 minutes. Gayatri, do you want me to speak longer? You seem to imply with your eyes there that I should. If not, I'll take your questions and we'll see how they go. Here's the poll result, by the way. I asked, has Joe Biden made the danger of East-West all-out conflict worse or worse to that effect? And the answer is yes, 95%, no, 5%. 6,500 people voted on YouTube, and on Twitter, 1,971 people voted. And there the answer was 85% yes, 15% no. On Telegram, 644 people voted, and there the answer was 95% yes, 5% no. What was the point of that speech in a nutshell? Asks a nut. Jason Giorgio says, I suspect the Ukraine will be liberated by Russia up to its pre-World War II boundaries. I suspect that that's true also. And Dante Allegri, what a wonderful name, says, Truss will have a difficult time distinguishing Australia from Austria. These are going too fast for me on the screen, so I'm not getting them all. The Crusader, Matt gives 10 euros to the fighting fund. Why can't the US let the Chinese write the, it's disappeared. It's not working, actually. Speak. Putin just testing the water. China always watching, says Alan Edge. Yen Fee Ho gives £4.49 on a super sticker. Nightly Moth, a good friend of the show, gives £5 to the fighting fund, although I can no longer see his comment. Why are they trying to drive Russia and China together? Surely they can see that is what they're doing. They can't be that stupid. I'm afraid they are, brother. They know that it's happened. They know that they've done it. It's inconceivable that they were unaware that it would ineluctably drive China and Russia into effectively one country. But that is what they did. Matt gives 10 euros. Why can't the US let the Chinese write the last chapter of their civil war after the throwout of the Manchu dynasty, after 100 years on their own? 200 years, Europe and the US played a crisis role in this area. Let me give you some history. Taiwan is recognized by the United Nations and virtually every single government in the world as a part of China, as much a part of China as Shanghai is a part of China, or as Hong Kong now is a part of China. Hong Kong was taken by force majeure, by the British and held as a colony for 150 years. But now it has returned to the motherland, as Taiwan inevitably will do, as I said to you. Even the Taiwanese don't pretend they are an independent country. They are not an independent country. They are not recognized by anybody as an independent country. They are the last holdout, as was just said, of the Chiang Kai-shek nationalist forces who retreated there after their defeat by the communists at the end of the Chinese Civil War. Every Chinese leader, whatever their political stripe, whatever their line, would have to have as an article of faith the recovery of a part of their national homeland. And no Chinese leader will ever, ever come to power who is not committed to the reunification of the two countries. Now, China has always said, and their actions prove this, that they wish to see the peaceful reunification of Taiwan with the motherland. But time is running out for that, you see, because the one thing China will not do is allow the United States to build Taiwan into an impregnable nuclear-armed fortress which will make reunification impossible. Not in the short, medium, even long term, impossible. China will not tolerate that. And the action, the provocative action by Pelosi this week has brought closer the danger of China recovering its Taiwanese province by force rather than by peaceful negotiation. Macarias 39 gives $2 Canadian and says her little trip cost an estimated $90 million US. That's a point I forgot to make, Macarias. The United States taxpayer paid $90 million for a drunk-fueled octogenarian to spend less than 24 hours in Taiwan and wreck forever normal relations between China and the country she's supposed to care for. You couldn't make up. You know, we're not run by James Bonds. It's very important to remember that. The reason why I recoil from all the conspiracy theories that it's all a big plan, they've all got it deeply planned, is that it imbues them with a level of skill and strategic sense and farsightedness that they simply don't have. I know them. I served in Parliament for almost 30 years, right next to them, either sitting next to them or sitting opposite them at one sword and 1 foot length apart. I've been up close and personal, not just, by the way, with the parliamentarians and the ministers, but the civil servants and the ambassadors and all the hangers-on. They're not James Bonds. They're not even Austin Powers. They're more Mr. Beans. Believe me. English Mr. Beans. And occasionally Scottish, too. Rachel Thompson says China is too smart to take the bait. Yes, well said. Stanley Park gives $13.99 Canadian. Thank you, Stanley. Is that a place or a person? Stanley, if you're a person, I thank you. Does the Pelosi trip, I've lost it. Does the Pelosi trip in Taiwan diminish the credibility and image of the US in the eyes of the global South? Yeah, of course. It goes without saying. It's the actions, the drunken, senile stumblings of a gerontocratic, octogenarian American leadership and empire. An empire in such an advanced state of decay that Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are its leaders. Just think about that. Any more, Gayatri? Dylan Fowler says the wicked witch of the West should not try and teach the Chinese about the yellow brick road. How very well said, Dylan. Almost Bob Dylan-esque that was. Thank you for that. Jason Giorgio says, Foggy Bottom sounds like the perfect place for a monkeypox infestation. Will go perfectly with the befuddled foggy minds that concoct US State Department policy. Jason, that is the message of the night so far. I'm amazed that it's the monkeypox season on us already. I hadn't even taken down my Ukraine decorations. Let's see. David Greenwood says, China's playing the long game. She is correct and wise. The future is with our great friend and ally, Russia. Their cruel Anglo-American empire is near its end, and soon the world will be free. So confident am I about that, David, that I, God willing, think I might still be here to see it. I'm certain that my children, the youngest of whom is 2 in the next few days, on the 8th of the 8th, 2020, she was born. How's that for a lucky number, Chinese style? 8/8/2020. She's only 2. She will grow up in a world in which Eurasia is the center of the world, and Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Iran, Venezuela, and all these countries that were at the last will be finally at the first. Question Everything gives $5. Thank you for that. Thank you for your amazing historical perspective and truthful analysis of current events, George. Thank you, and thank you for that kind donation. I really appreciate it. Fuzzy Dice says, love the suit. It's actually just a jacket. I've got my pajama trousers on underneath, but you will never see me in my pajamas. Thank you. Harold Hedge says, the neocons didn't get the Chinese response they wanted. Good move, China. I concur, Harold, with that. Stephen Calder says, the SNP's attitude to foreign policy is even more right-wing and pro-imperialist than Boris Johnson. I'm glad you've noticed, Stephen. So many liberal, useful idiots in England, the New Statesman and the Guardian and so on, seem to imagine that the SNP, founded by fascists in 1934, Hitler collaborationists, who had to be interned during the war because of their intention to be an adjunct of Hitler's Third Reich, is somehow a progressive movement and party. Nationalism in Western developed countries is the socialism of fools. It is embraced by people who have lost the faith in socialism and looked around for a different flag to wave. Not me, and not you either, Stephen, I'm sure. Mohammed says they cannot handle the Russian response. How do they think they're going to deal with China? You're right. If China had shot Pelosi's airplane out of the sky, like the Americans did to the Chinese foreign minister, Zhou Enlai's plane, taking off from Bandung, I think in 1956, 53, perhaps, at the Bandung conference. They actually bombed Zhou Enlai's plane. He was luckily not on it. But 7 people died, at least 7, maybe more. Many were wounded in a CIA bomb attack on the airplane of the Chinese foreign minister. If China had done that, if China took the same attitude to the USS Ronald Reagan that it took to HMS Amethyst in the Yangtze incident in 1949, Ronald Reagan would be in Davy Jones's locker right now. China could have sunk it just like that and would have been fully entitled to. But the Chinese leadership is more wise, less hungry for war than the leadership of the US and the UK and much of Western Europe. You knew about the Yangtze incident, yeah? Look it up if you don't know about it, or ask me and I'll tell you more. Simeon Wardle gives €10. Thank you, Simeon. Great show on Sunday, an honor to watch you every week, along with Jimmy Dore, Russell Brand, and Redacted. Great company, Simeon. I'm proud to be a part of it. If you add last Wednesday's 500,000 Galloway Show to the incredible audience of the previous week's mother of all talk shows, the numbers are more than 1.5 million people in a single week watching my shows. No one in the whole world can touch those numbers. No one. Let's see what else there is. Dylan, again, I agree with George about Russia and Ukraine, but Taiwan and Tibet are different. Do say why, Dylan. Come back on and tell us why they're different. Jason again says Taiwan and mainland China is more like East Germany versus West Germany, or the Confederate States versus the United States. Anyone who's not been on yet, Gayatri, so we're giving everyone a fair break. Brent Meister General, what an intriguing name. China does not need to invade any other country. It has worldwide economic dominance. That's why all my children, including the 2-year-old, are learning Chinese and going to Chinese school. Because when they grow up, China will be by far and away the most important country in the whole world. And having a short name, easy to pronounce, by the Chinese, and being able to speak their language will be of inestimable value. Try it with your own kids. Chopsy Pacino gives £8.99 for the Fighting Fund to relaunch the midweek moats. I'm grateful, Chopsy, wonderful name. George, in all your years at the political front line, including the Cold War period, where does today's global political scene sit on the political spectrum? Has it been worse? It's never been more dangerous if we factor in the possibility of nuclear conflagration. In the Cold War period, which you're right to remind me, I lived through, the balance of terror, the mutually assured destruction, or MAD for short, meant that it would be mad for either side to launch nuclear weapons. Kept a cold peace between East and West. Then we had the moment of maximum recklessness when the Soviet Union collapsed, when Russia was ruled by a drunk lying stupid on the floor whilst the West picked Russia's pocket. That period of unipolar power, when Fukuyama was credibly at the time, to many people, able to claim that it was the end of history and that so-called democracy and so-called neoliberal economics would reign supreme across the world forever. That was a terrifyingly dangerous period. And in that period, places like Yugoslavia were destroyed, Afghanistan, Iraq were invaded and occupied and destroyed, and millions of people paid with their life's blood, millions of them. That's another war, by the way, that is boiling up again in Iraq, where competing factions are fighting it out on the floor of the Parliament building with guns, inside the green zone with guns. That was all a terrifyingly dangerous period. Why I'm less afraid now, short of hypersonic nuclear warfare, short of that, of course, if that happens, it's curtains for all of us, is that the balance of power in the world has shifted decisively over the last few years. Since Putin picked Russia back up off the floor, made it strong again, and recovered Russia's lost prestige that it lost with the collapse of the USSR, and with China's vaulting progress, economic and military and in every other way, I believe the Russian-Chinese alliance is not just unbreakable, but unbeatable. So I'm less afraid now than I was in that lacunae between the end of the Soviet Union and the rise of Russia and China. Mohammed says, do you think the West care about Muslims in China? They've killed more Muslims than anyone. I couldn't have put that better myself. They hate the Chinese and they hate Muslims, but they love Chinese Muslims. Go figure. Let's see what else. Ashur Banipal says, I'm voting Trump 2024 and I'm a communist. Well, if the choice was Donald Trump versus Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, I'd vote for Trump also, if that was the choice. I hope there'll be a better choice on the ballot paper. But interesting. Dino Bomis says the US has the world's largest prison population and about 1 million homeless people, yet it lectures other countries about freedom and democracy. I'd expect to be more than 1 million homeless by the end of this crisis. There'll be millions in tent cities living rough, like the Bowery of old in the Depression. The United States has tens of millions of people, scores of millions of people, who don't have health insurance and who are bankrupted. Daily, people are bankrupted by the cost of medical treatment that was not covered by their insurance. The United States is in a state of total disrepair. Its race relations, its community relations, its crime rate renders it a basket case. By any objective standard, the United States is a basket case. It's Upper Volta with rockets. Upper Volta, now known as Burkina Faso, but I'm showing my age. Federico Bardi says, I visited Scotland from Italy for the first time last week, and now know why it produced such a courageous man like George. Great land and people. Thank you, Federico. I hope you were able to get a cup of tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and they weren't closing up, especially for tourists in the summer. I hope you had a good time, my friend. Fragile gives NOK 100. What's NOK? I think it's Norwegian crowns. In which case, thank you kindly. I think you're right. The Serbs will fight until the end because it's a matter of their existence. When you're pushed into a corner, you either surrender or fight back. Exactly. And nobody that remembers Vidic can imagine the Serbians surrendering. You need to look him up if you're not a United fan or of a certain age. He'll murder you because he comes from Serbia, the crowd used to sing. Vladimir Sutinovsky gives Australian dollars 5. Thank you very much, Vladimir. Good evening, George, from Western Australia. Here's $1 from me and $1 for 4 other people that have not donated yet to any of your shows. Perfectly put, perfectly expressed. Let's see. Shane Gahan gives €5. Thank you very much. Great stuff, mate. Watching from County Carlow in Ireland. My mother's from not far from there, and I especially thank you because she'll be watching this. Cam 35mm gives $5. Thanks for bringing up the mighty Vidic, George. His bone-crunching tackles were legendary. Indeed they were. I'd give anything. If I could turn back time, one of the things I'd like to see is Vidic in action again, alongside Rio Ferdinand, the ballet dancer. Rio was silk and smooth, and Vidic was Serbian. And what a double act it was. Liz Hill gives $100. Liz, I don't know what to say, my dear friend. Love you, George, from Malcolm Byrne and me in the United States. Thank you for all you do to keep us in the know. And a big hug to the lovely Mrs. Galloway, Gayatri. And she sends it right back at you, Liz and Malcolm. Malcolm is a Pulitzer Prize winning radio presenter in the United States. His show is really worth watching, listening. I myself was interviewed on it comparatively recently. Maybe start with that one. It also happens to include my top 10 musical choices. It was kind of my desert island discs. Malcolm conducted the interview, but Liz was the one who arranged it. $100. God bless you. Thank you very much indeed for that. Darren Butler says the CIA have gotten bored of Zelensky. I suspect you might be right, because there's a certain ominous drumbeat now from the United States securitocracy about the danger to the life of Zelensky. There comes a point, you see, with such people that they become more useful to the United States dead than alive. I think Zelensky might be entering into that period. Lorraine Jones, China's a successful socialist country. That is why they hate them. Of course. All of the things I said about China, of course, axiomatically linked to the socialism in Chinese characteristics. It's not the socialism I spent my life fighting for, but it works. It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice, right? And the cat, which has been created in China by its leadership, works. It catches mice. It's lifted 800 million people out of poverty. The greatest lift of the greatest number of people from poverty in all human history, and it's done it all almost in my lifetime. I was born in 1954. It's my birthday on the 16th of August, and I'm linked every year at that time with Madonna, who was also born on the 16th of August. I bumped into her once in Harrods. I must tell you that story sometime. But since 1949 till now, China has built all that it has built, almost in my lifetime. It's astounding. We're not talking about the centuries of the capitalist world. We're talking not even 75 years. Yeah? Think about that. That's why they hate them. Imagine being overtaken by all indices, overtaken by an upstart waving a red flag, singing the International, and ruled by a party called the Communist Party. Imagine how that feels in Madison Avenue, in Wall Street, in the American structures of power. Imagine how that feels. Peter McGowan gives £10. Thank you, Peter. If there was an election in Taiwan tomorrow, would they vote to be part of the Chinese mainland or to keep the status quo? I saw you in Liverpool a few years ago, George. Thank you, Peter. The KMT, Kuomintang, the Chiang Kai-shek nationalist movement, represents about 45% of the population of Taiwan. Their policy is reunification with China. They just want to rule China rather than China ruling them. Their dream is that their Chinese nationalist trend, personified by the late Chiang Kai-shek, will one day return to power in Beijing. The other 55%, I've got these figures roughly right, I think, support a more pro-American policy. But let me put it another way, Peter. If you had a referendum on whether or not Taiwan should declare its independence from China, that proposition would be overwhelmingly defeated. The overwhelming majority of people on Taiwan would not vote to cut the Gordian knot, to sever the umbilical cord from the motherland of China. Chinese people are very patriotic people, you know. They're very, very proud of themselves, with much to be proud about, certainly in the last 75 years. Hugh says China's meteoric rise took hold when they began to adopt free market reforms. Hardly an advertisement for socialism. That is, Hugh, you making an arse of yourself, if you'll forgive the pun. Because the government, the state, rules China, not the corporations. That's the difference between China and here in the West, in the United States. You can become a billionaire, although it's a very high risk when you become a billionaire of ending up either in prison or up against a wall being shot and your family charged for the bullet that killed you. A very big percentage of billionaires in China have ended up that way. You can change the party in Britain and America, but you can't change the policies. In China, you can't change the party, but you can change the policies. As you've just alluded to, China began the large-scale introduction of capitalist reforms at the time of Deng Xiaoping and continued now. Xi Jinping is swinging it back a little bit towards more socialist policies in China. But no corporation, as the Alibaba guy, what's his name again? Let's call him Alibaba. As he just discovered, he became the most powerful and important plutocrat in China, but it didn't stop him when he fell foul of the government and the state. Jack Ma, my 8-year-old boy, has just informed me. Jack Ma discovered that don't get too big for your boots. The state runs China. The government runs China. The party runs China, not the corporations, not the billionaires. Be careful, Jack, or you'll end up with some of your old pals behind bars, or worse. Well, Jack was nimble and quick, and he did watch his P's and Q's, and now he's back. And I'm glad to say, Jack, why don't you sponsor the midweek mother of all talk shows? It can be sponsored by Alibaba. Here's the thing. Now that you're nimble and quick and back on your feet, think about it, Jack. Let's see. Mr. 13FNG gives 20 Canadian dollars. Thank you for that. The Chinese believe revenge is a dish best served cold. Chinese measure 100 times before they cut. The global South leaders know this and are not going to switch sides from the lack of action over the Taiwan visit. Thanks, George. Thank you very much indeed. Jack's house is a good tune, but who's Jack? Balka Yanduma gives 10 euros from my good wife's homeland of the Netherlands, I think. 10 euros. Make it easy on yourself. Call me BJ. BJ has certain connotations in English. I prefer not. What are your thoughts on the racist component in the drive to contain China? And if this impulse might lower the nuclear threshold of a US vis-a-vis China? Definitely. They don't like the fact that the Chinese are not just communists, but Asians. But it's the communist bit that gets them hardest, if you get my drift. Golden Silence gives 5 American dollars. I'm much, much appreciative. George, I wish your fellow Europeans could watch your program before Europe goes dark and back to cave paintings. Keep up the good work. Well, the lamps are going out all over Europe this winter, and we may not see them lit again in our lifetime. The public buildings in Germany will go dark. As soon as the sun goes down, there will be total darkness in urban Germany with all the consequences of safety and security and crime that will bring with it. The Germans are going to be burning their own forests to keep themselves warm. They have already begun fitting out warm rooms. Never mind food banks, plenty of those all over the West, but warm rooms where when you can't afford to heat your own home, you can go and huddle together with others, like something out of a George Orwell dystopian novel, isn't it? The lights are going out. Industry will cease to spark and turn. Millions will be laid off in the greatest act of self-harm any set of Western governments have ever committed upon their own people. they struggled to use that Chinese phrase of which I'm so fond. They struggled mightily to lift a huge rock, only to drop it on their own feet. Jeanette Hope says, wow, Cuba, brilliant, George. Hope China are listening. I think they're listening. Thanks for that, my dear sister. Question everything. I think vodka and ice cream is Nancy and Sleepy Joe's plastic surgery results are lovely, just lovely. You're right. She's the disinterred bride of John McCain. Just think about that. Ant Wango says LATAM is Chinese supported now anyway, too late for the West. Africa is China supported. China is the tide that lifts all boats. Brilliantly said. Couldn't say it better. Won't try. Thanks for that excellent piece of wisdom. Jason says, Kosovo is a NATO mafia protectorate, just like the Ukraine. You're right. Do you know that Kosovo is the biggest exporter of drugs, guns, and women for the sex trade in all of Europe? Kosovo. Nice, plucky, little Kosovo, our NATO protectorate. Drugs, guns, prostitutes. I could throw in beggars, but I don't want to rub their noses in it too much. By the way, I speak as a former president of the Great Britain Albania Society. Nobody should infer from what I'm saying here that I hate Albanians. Far from it. I hate Albanians that are tools of the United States and NATO, chanting Tony, Tony at Tony Blair, who helped to destroy their own country. Not that kind of Albanian. No thanks. Edward Smith says Irish First Lady Sabina Higgins is being crucified by the Irish mainstream media for saying there should be a negotiated peace in Ukraine. I saw that, Edward. And Corbyn is facing the same thing here in Britain. For a guy who's all washed up and is completely finished in national politics, apparently, the mainstream media in Britain ain't half obsessed by Corbyn. It's everywhere in the mainstream media today that Corbyn said pouring weapons into Ukraine is merely prolonging, pardon me, first time I've ever sneezed live on air, is merely prolonging the agony in Ukraine. Capture that, clip that. An authentic sneeze. Well, as I pointed out to the journalist that first highlighted it, what exactly is your point, caller? In what way is that not true? A blind man can see it's true. Corbyn's merely articulating that which is self-evidently obvious. And you know it. For all your fulmination, for all your traducing and insulting, you know it. You lying whores, you media whores. That's what you are. You've sold your own arses to your employers, and you're ready to lie through your teeth and slander anyone who tells the truth. Let's see where that goes. Steve Bogakov gives SEK, I presume that's Swedish crowns, 100. What European country will be the first to come crawling to Russia with their tails under their legs, begging for forgiveness and switch sides? Do you see new lines being drawn in Europe in the future? Yeah, the Slovakian president said today that in 1945, the Germans walked all the way to Moscow to freeze. Now they can freeze in their own country. The government of Bulgaria has fallen and will be replaced by a government much more sympathetic to Russia. The government of Italy will be replaced by a government much more sympathetic to Russia. I suspect that Italy will be the first country to repair its relations with Russia. But don't bank on France not being second. French are quite nimble on their feet, if you get my drift. Let's see. Scott Davidson says, Israel gets its orders from the US. It's the other way around, George. It isn't, Scott. It really, really isn't. The tail never wags the dog. The dog wags the tail. Orocult. America is facing its Suez Canal movement. Very well put. I wish I'd thought of that. The only question is, how long will its death throes wreak havoc across the globe before sanity prevails? Too long, it seems. You're right. That is a very good example, metaphor. For Britain and for France, the Suez Crisis in 1956 marked the end of their role as empires. Humiliated by the United States of America and President Eisenhower, forced to withdraw from Suez, humiliated and ended as individual powers, as empire powers in their own right. This is America's Suez Canal moment. I wish I'd thought to say so, and I thank you for doing so on my show. Paul Milewski says, I'm afraid the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, if it feels threatened, will pull Poland into the conflict and carve a piece of Polish land to create Polin between Warsaw and Kiev. Paul, I've been saying that for a few months now. And the Hungarians may do the same in Carpathia. Mark my words. Robert Buffton says the Biden administration have been systemically destroying the USA from within. If China slows down trade, they will collapse. Job done. If I was running China, I certainly would. I'd be prepared to take a hit on my export earnings to break the back of the American economy. But whether the Chinese will take the same view, I don't know. I don't speak for them, neither do I know their mind. Dante Allegri again says, Europe has no future. It is a museum. Very powerful. Because the sun's rising in the east, it didn't have to set in the west, you know. We could have had two suns in the sky at the same time, like the Babylonians and the Greeks and different empires have coexisted in the past without necessarily going to war with each other. But we've chosen the path of war rather than the path of cooperation and coexistence. And it will be seen historically as a very, very grave mistake. Me and my family, I don't know, maybe we'll have to move to the east. We can't work, we can't earn money. No British media house is going to give me a job, so I can't work in Britain for Russia or Russian-affiliated media. I can't earn any money. I haven't earned any money for 6 months. So we may have to move to the east. I don't know where. Hong Kong, maybe. Moscow, maybe. Belgrade, maybe. The football's good there. The one thing that would attract me to Belgrade is that Torrent could play for Red Star Belgrade, and he's cheering that thought right at this moment. Metho Nelson gives 10 American dollars. Thank you for that. It would seem to me that Sims would rather set the world on fire rather than face their constituents. They simply have nothing to offer since ID politics don't work anymore. I hope they don't work anymore. I've been thinking a lot about that today, and I'll have more to say on it in my monologue on Sunday in the Mother of All talk shows as we approach the 20th anniversary early next year of the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Let's see what's up next. JW says, lots of people living comfortably in Western countries with very little idea about the rest of the world, commenting to damn the West. Interesting. Well, I have a lot of an idea about the rest of the world. My battery is running low. I might want to plug in my PC, it says here. My wife is Indonesian. I have 5 mixed race children, 3 of them half Asian, 2 of them half Arabic. I have spent much of my life in foreign affairs. I'd have made a quite good foreign secretary, to be perfectly honest. Probably a better foreign secretary than I would have a prime minister. I know a lot about the world. And when I damn the West, I'm damning the leaders. Nobody loves Britain more than me, which is why I hate the idea of it breaking up, which is why I was so keen that it should leave the European Union, because I believe in Britain and the British people. It's the rulers of Britain that I hate. But I love Accrington Stanley and Manchester United and Celtic and Inverness Caledonian Thistle, Ross County and Rotherham, Southampton and Sunderland. If I had to leave Britain, I'd miss them most of all. I'd miss the game that we gave to the world. We gave it to the whole world. Together with the English language, those are our 2 greatest legacies that we have gifted to the world. So I'm not damning my own people. I love them deeply. I love them. Now I'm down to 9% battery and I can see no more messages. Gayatri's surprised to hear it, but they're back. Michael Curry says Clinton bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. Indeed he did, killing journalists. He also bombed the television station, the equivalent of the BBC in Belgrade. Go on YouTube after this and look at my short film from outside the ruined television station, where tea ladies in the TV station were murdered by Clinton and Blair. The Serbian people will never forget NATO and what it did to them just over 20 years ago. 7 minutes left. Caruana gives 5 English pounds. Thanks for that. Any truth in the after the 2014 coup, Ukraine received billions from the IMF on condition of land sales, resulted in 3 US companies buying 70% of Ukrainian farmland. Every word of that is a fact. I don't need to have an opinion on it, Caruana. Every word of that is a fact. The IMF gave them $17 billion on condition that they lifted the ban on foreign ownership of their agricultural land. And now their agricultural land is owned by Monsanto and BlackRock and the other giants. But guess what? Most of it is now occupied by the Russian armed forces and by Kadyrov and by the liberation armies of the Donbass. Ha! BlackRock, Monsanto, your land took a hell of a beating and you'll never get it back. Mr. 13FNG gives 10 Canadian dollars. Nice to see you again. What side will SAU and India choose in the end? Will have a major effect on the balance between the 2 poles. I think you mean Saudi Arabia, yeah? West versus the global South. Who will these 2 countries side with at the end? Love you, George. Thanks very much for that. Saudi Arabia is joining the BRICS. It's trading oil with China in RMB. MBS and Putin appear to be rather more friendly than MBS and Joe Biden. The Saudis know that the American empire is dying and that the Eurasian heartland has hoved into view with such starkness over this last period. My computer is closing down. Maybe it will start again. I've got 5 minutes left. It nearly made it to the end. So I'm in no doubt that the empire is dying and that Eurasia is rising. I've no doubt that people will join with the rising and not with the dying. Nobody wants to shackle themselves to a decrepit, ramshackle empire that is falling apart at the seams. Nobody will do that. I believe that Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Argentina and Brazil was one of the founder members of the BRICS, but will now, under President Lula, whose victory seems undoubted, in just a couple of months' time, Brazil will throw all of its great power and weight into making the BRICS a shining city on a hill. And that shining city will draw the interest and the affection and even the people of the dying empire. Someone wrote to me today, they were a classical musician, loving Russia, loving the Russian people, loving Russia's culture. He said, President Putin should throw open his doors to people like me. And I answered, I think the Russians would welcome you with open arms. I think that more and more people will see their future in the East and not in the West, either physically removing themselves to the East or working in industries that are oriented towards the East, working in industries that are building solid trading relations with the East. It's our governments. You know, the British Parliament today closed its TikTok account because of TikTok's alleged links to the Chinese government. TikTok, which today took down yet another of my videos that are running without the slightest problem on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, but taken down on TikTok. Do you know that I'm on my second public warning from TikTok? That I'll be deplatformed by them for political reasons? Breach of community guidelines. Talking about the things I've been talking to you about for the last 90 minutes. That TikTok was banned today by the British Parliament. It closed its TikTok account. So now you won't any longer be able to see scantily clad members of Parliament dancing to disco music on their TikTok videos. I don't know how civilization can survive this earth-shattering decision by the bigwigs in the British Parliament. It's been marvelous for me. I've enjoyed this longer form. I hope you did. I felt quite relaxed talking to you about quite serious matters. It's back to the mother of all talk shows on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time for, I think, a 2-hour show this coming week. If not 90 minutes, then maybe 2 hours. After the summer holidays are over, we'll be back to 3 hours, not just on Sundays, but on Wednesdays as well. So on behalf of Gayatri Galloway, Torrin Galloway, Zane Galloway, and George Galloway, who together have brought you the Galloway Show, clue was in the name, this evening, I thank you for your donations and for your attention, and bid you all a very good night.